Overall, fantastic. Now, some impressions about Argentina. It's obviously so. So this struck me the first time I was in Argentina. I mean, it really is pretty amazing. There are parts of Buenos Aires that could be Europe, that could be Paris, that could be Paris in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. And indeed, until about 1918, Argentina was a very free economy and created immense amounts of wealth. It was about at 90% of the United States, so it was almost equal to the United States in terms of GDP per capita. So you can see in Buenos Aires the remnants of vast and amazing wealth, and what could have been. Right? If you go to, I did this last time. I didn't do this visit, but last time I went to the cemetery in Buenos Aires. And I know you think, oh my God, Yaron, that's pretty morbid. But what my wife and I have discovered over the years is that some in rich cities that were rich in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the cemeteries are some of the best sculpture museums anyway. Because what happened is when people died who had money, sculptures were created to celebrate their lives or to mourn their deaths, depending on the attitude of the people burying them, I guess. And it's truly quite spectacular. I think one of the best places in the world to see great sculpture is the cemetery in Milan. Milan in northern Italy. Milan was the richest city in Italy. It's an industrial city. It is the home of La Scala. It is the great opera company. It was historically the richest city in Italy. I mean, historically, in terms of modern history, it's the industrial center of Italy. To this day, it's the richest city in Italy. But in the late 19th century, early 20th century, people had taste. They wanted beautiful sculptures. And you go to this place, the cemetery, and there are thousands of good sculptures. Italian carvers in marble, in Carrara marble, beautiful, beautiful things. I mean, you go to Verdi's mausoleum or Toscanini's mausoleum, but everything, everywhere you go there, just sculpture. It just was unbelievable. It was like overload, so much, and so many of them beautiful. A lot of them are sad, obviously, because it's a cemetery, but beautiful. Now, the same thing on a smaller scale is true of Buenos Aires. The Buenos Aires cemetery has some magnificent sculptures. And my wife and I spent a few hours there last time we were in Buenos Aires taking pictures, and it is truly amazing. So I highly recommend going to cemeteries of cities that used to be rich or are rich, right? Rich today is okay as well, but cities where they valued sculpture, cities where they value, even in America, in New York, I think there's a cemetery that has some good sculptures. So anyway, it was so you get this sense of grandeur in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century in Buenos Aires. And then starting in 1918, but really starting in the 1930s with the rise of Perón, what you get is increased statism. What you get is the 1930s, the rise of basically fascism, mimicking the fascism of Europe, which continues really into the 1970s. And as fascism dominates, the country becomes poor. So if you look at graphs, America goes up, and Argentina stays flat, down, flat, up a little bit, but it basically doesn't move. So Argentina's wealth got stuck at where it was about in 1918, whereas American wealth continued to rise throughout the 20th century. And the gap between them today is astronomical. The United States, I think, is 4 times richer than Argentina on a per capita basis. So it's an incredible story of history. And again, as if we need more proof, as if we need more evidence, as if we need another concrete. Here's a concrete that when you allow people to be free, and it doesn't matter where in the world they are, it doesn't matter what genes they have, it doesn't matter what ethnic group they belong to. If you allow people to be free, if you leave them alone, if you establish the rule of law and property rights, as Argentina had from about the middle of the 19th century through 1918, they get rich. They produce culture. And it really is sad, tragic, depressing that people ignore this, and then they see the decline that happens under statism, but they want more statism. And of course, this goes to the heart of my argument that unless you address the issue of altruism and collectivism, nothing will budge. More evidence that tells us that capitalism works is not what the world needs. I mean, it would be great, but it's not what the world needs because we have all the evidence in the world that we need. Capitalism works. Freedom works. Property rights works. Contract law works. Leaving people free to pursue their own happiness, to pursue their own life works. I mean, it's not the reason you should do it. It's not the only reason you should do it, right? It's right. It's my happiness. Who are you to restrict my ability to pursue it? But it's a beautiful thing to see it working, So in the 1980s, Argentina did quite a bit of liberalization of the economy. The problem is, just like Donald Trump today, and I'll draw a few parallels to Trump, is that while maybe they deregulated some and they opened up with trade and they created they moved towards more capitalism, if you would, slowly, tentatively, they moved in that direction. At the same time, they didn't cut government spending. So what happened was you got a massive deficit, a deficit that was not sustainable, a deficit that ultimately resulted in poor economic growth and the discrediting of the liberalization policies of the 1980s that led ultimately to the elections of the Kirchners, the husband and then the wife, to become president, and then moved back towards Peronism, or fascism and statism, not the same kind of brutal fascism as the 1950s and 60s under Peron, but still an economic fascism that was and populism, and that was incredibly destructive to the Argentinian economy. So Argentina has suffered through almost 20 years of, again, stagnation, and as a consequence, more poverty and more difficulties. And of course, now over the last 2 years, they've elected a president who is mildly better, another businessman, who is mildly better than the Kirchners were. Not great. Also, by the way, a little bit maybe like Donald Trump, a fan of the Fountainhead, and he's doing a little bit better. And you can tell Argentina is a little bit more vibrant. There's a little bit more dynamism. There's a little bit more going on right now. A little bit more going on right now. But this is the point relating to Trump. Cutting taxes and deregulation are all good, but you have to cut spending. Unless you cut spending, there will be a backlash. Unless you cut spending, you will pay the price. Unless you cut spending, you're driving the country in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, to bankruptcy. So, what the U.S. has to do, what the U.S. must do, is cut spending. And until you cut spending, nothing else really matters that much. So all the rest is BS. And of course, what Trump has done and what Republicans have done has significantly increased spending, not cut spending. So it's sad, right? It's sad. Now, of course, in addition to that, Argentina is filled, like every statist regime, is filled with corruption. Now, those of you who want me to talk about Brazil, I will. I'll talk about Brazil. I'll talk about Lulu in a minute. So be patient. Lula, I guess. I don't know why I call him Lulu. Maybe because he's Lulu. So Argentina is improving a little bit. But here's another related aspect. So one of the things you notice in Argentina is that the cars in the streets are small and old. And they're all manual shift, right? All of them, almost all of them are manual drive. And the question is why? And lots of different makes, and they're all European makes, almost all European makes, some Chevys. But you just don't see almost in every other country I go to, you see a certain percentage of German cars, and nice cars. In Argentina, very few. And the reason is simple. The amount of tariffs that have been placed on car manufacturers importing cars. And what has happened is that car manufacturers have been forced to build their cars in Argentina. Cars are more expensive, both because of the tariffs and because they're locally built. They don't have economies of scale. The cheapest cars to build are obviously small and manual drive. And that's what you get. And of course, the cheapest cars are used cars. So because the tariffs are so high, and because car manufacturing in Argentina itself is inefficient, car prices are very high, taxes are very high, tariffs are very high. The quality of cars, therefore, is that people buy are low, and they buy the simplest models because that's what they can afford. Again, a sign of the poverty, but more so a sign of the stupid, ridiculous, anti-capitalist ideas of anti-free market ideas of tariffs. So this links to the fact that I just saw a story about the Trump administration, right? Not only are we going to this so-called trade war with China, we'll talk about that later, but now, he doesn't want to just raise tariffs because there are limits, and he doesn't want to get into trade war. So what they're doing is they are going to, there's a proposal that Trump supports to try to protect domestic vehicle manufacturers by increasing the restrictions, the environmental restrictions on the cars being imported. So they are going to be held to a higher standard in terms of pollution than domestic cars and than the standards they're using right now. They're trying to figure out how they can use. Now notice this is the deregulation president. They're trying to figure out how to use the Clean Air Act to subject cars made overseas to strict emission standard testing and reviews when entering the United States. Stricter than what we would do like in a smog test or what is standard in the US right now, right? The rules, this I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal, the rules could effectively require more expensive technology on some foreign cars or subject those cars to more expensive hurdles, that's the key, that can be billed to the manufacturer or importer. So in other words, what he's trying to do is raise the cost to Americans of foreign cars, thus doing two things, just like in Argentina. Encourage them to come and build in the United States, even though building in the United States is not the most efficient thing to do, even though building in the United States increases costs, or to raise prices. Either way, consumers are going to see higher prices for automobiles, right? So Trump is really serious about this idea of trying to bring manufacturing back, supposedly, as if it went away, to the United States. He is serious about penalizing imports. This is not a joke for him. This is not some tactic to open up borders and to force other countries to behave, if you will, to lower their tariffs. No, he really believes. He said in the campaign, he hasn't done it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did, that if companies moved their operations to Mexico, because in Mexico it's cheaper to produce, and then brought their products back into the United States, he would penalize that. And he's serious. He is going to do that. He is serious. He is a serious mercantilist. He is like the Kirchners in Argentina in terms of the mercantilism. And the Kirchners at some point had tariffs, had penalties, both on imports and on exports. Because there were shortages and people were exporting food. And they wanted to keep the food into Argentina because food in Argentina was going up in price because of all the regulations that aren't controlled domestically. That they wanted to make sure that the food stayed in Argentina, so they put in taxes for exportation. But they had this same kind of mercantilist, a perceptually bound, non-thinking, non-economic perspective on trade that Donald Trump has, and it's stunning to me. It's stunning to me that Trump is getting away with it, and almost nobody's calling on it. Almost nobody is challenging on it. I mean, if I were in Congress, I would put together a bill taking away the powers of the president to impose tariffs and to engage in trade wars, bringing them back to where they belong, trade treaties, to where they belong, which is Congress. That's what I would do if I was Paul Ryan in the House. I would put together a bill, a free trade bill, that basically declared the United States a free trade zone, lower tariffs unilaterally across all goods, and told the president to take a hike in the name of reason and the science of economics. So where were we? Yeah. So if we want to be like Argentina, if we want to be poor, then keep electing in the United States, keep electing populist presidents who demonize free trade, who demonize capitalism, who don't have a clue about economics, who advocate for nationalist policies. If you keep voting for people like that, you will get Argentina in the United States. Instead of Argentina becoming America, it seems that the world is heading towards a situation where America is going to become more like Argentina, which is sad. Now, hopefully, we can turn things around in Argentina, because they know, see, this is the difference between Argentinians and Americans. They know, at least there's a percentage of them that knows, that this crap doesn't work. They've lived it. They know that these policies are suicide. They've lived them. We in the United States, we think we could dabble with socialism. We think we can dabble with protectionism. We think we can dabble with statism. We think we can dabble with fascism and still get away with it because we're ignorant and naive and complacent. Very, very, very complacent.
Anybody saw us beating, let's say, China? They're devaluing their currency to a level that you wouldn't believe.